Please welcome to the stage Tiffany Taylor, President, ASU+GSV Summit. And please welcome her panel, Andy Duneaway, Director, Career Connected Learning, Pearson. Kiera Peltz, founder of the Coding School. Carly Chase, Vice President and General Manager of Careers, U.S. News & World Report. Ted Wells, President, STEMconnector. And Casey Welch, Vice President of Careers, Pearson.
Being here this morning and just for being here with intention and bringing energy. And thank you so much to the TIES team for convening us with such care. And so we just heard from Kiera, whose keynote set the exact right tone for where we're headed today. She reminded us that preparing the next generation isn't just about catching up to the future, it's about having the courage to build it. It's about building pathways to jobs that don't exist yet and confronting inequity that exists across the system. And these are systems that we all, if we're honest with ourselves, and I'm talking really honest, that they weren't built for agility and boldness. And so think about it for 5 seconds. We have emerging technologies, we have shifting economic models, and we have entirely new career pathways. And they're redefining what it means for us to define work ready. And they're pushing us to ask harder questions about how education, policy, and industry prepare people for what's next. So this panel is about surfacing that reality and imagining something better. So we're joined by 4 extraordinary leaders who are not only navigating these changes, but they're leading through it. So we just heard from Kiera. Again, she's the founder of the Coding School, who's scaling AI and quantum training globally, and she's helping leaders build the skills that we will define the future. We have Ted Wells of STEMconnector, who's bringing together industry, education, and government to build sustainable cross-sector partnerships that expand access and align talent pipelines with emerging workforce needs. We have Casey Welch of Pearson, who's building scalable tri-credit pathways that bring students closer to real opportunity. And we have Andrew Duneaway, also at Pearson, whose cross-sector work bridges education and workforce in ways that are both responsive and future-focused. And finally, we have Carly Chase of U.S. News World Report, who's helping learners navigate uncertainty, define success on their own terms, especially in the era of rapid change. So let's give them a quick round of applause. So my hope is that we're going to be able to share a story that's both honest and hopeful, and we're going to name that reality. We're going to talk about what transformation actually looks like, and then we're going to talk about scale. And last note, I started my career as a 6th grade special education teacher, so having you sit here and not be interactive is just not in my bones. So at the end of this conversation, I'm hoping that you will lift your voices up, share out some big questions that are top of mind, or even share out reflections. Does that sound good? All right, thank you. All right, so we're going to jump in. So when we talk about STEM workforce, it's easy to default to these buzzwords, right? AI, automation, upskilling. But sometimes we miss the disconnect that already exists. So we have learners who feel confident and prepared until they realize the job market has shifted under their feet. We have employers who are struggling to find talent, and it's not because there's a lack of potential, but it's because the pathways aren't aligned. And then we have, again, systems that were built for a completely different era that are trying to serve a different reality. So let's name the friction and what's broken. Ted, you've spent years at the intersection of industry, education, and government. You've been building a national network that includes Fortune 500 companies, higher ed, and federal partners. When you listen to conversations that's happening across those industries, what's the workforce challenge that keeps surfacing? What's the disconnect between what employees are urgently looking for and what they're actually finding?
I think it's like a systemic connection that is the biggest challenge. You have these one-off efforts where an employer invests in a particular strand of education, whether it be on a national level or a nonprofit or in a particular community. And these are noble efforts. They're really important. We want educate. The first step is being there for employers. It's really important, especially as Kiera was saying, like the half-life of innovation, technological innovation required in the workforce continues to shrink. So like things are changing much more quickly than they ever have. So the need for that teacher, I always say, most in-service biology teachers, K-16, have been in service since before CRISPR, which is the gene editing tool that's used across the industry, was even discovered, you know? And I've been doing STEMconnector longer than CRISPR was discovered. So there's a lot of change that's happening. And to create a system that is responsive to the needs of learners, that makes the learning that they have relevant, is really the piece I think that's critical. And it takes groups like the ecosystems, STEM ecosystems, community of practice, to be able to achieve and realize that responsiveness. Groups like DoD STEM and STEMX and STEMconnector, we're all trying to endeavor to do the same thing, and frankly ASU+GSV is as well. So these communities are incredibly important, and it's more important now than ever for us to be continuing to engage in groups like this.
I love it. So Andrew, I'm going to take it to you because you're working directly with employers, again, to understand what they need. And you're also building learning modules and models to meet that demand. So when you compare the skills companies say they're desperate for with what they're finding in candidates, what's the fundamental mismatch that just keeps coming up?
Yeah, so in our conversations with employers, you know, the technical skills are really that table stakes, right? I mean, those are expected in many ways, but what employers see in future employees that they lack, and the gap that comes in is the ability to apply those things like Kiera talked about, right? The application of those technical skills, the ability to collaborate across an organization or across, you know, functions within an organization, the ability to be adaptable when things change, right? So it really leans into these durable skills, power skills, human skills, you know, however you want to frame them, right? These are what really differentiate the success of a lot of the employees that they're seeing come into their organizations. We released some research earlier this year titled Lost in Transition, and it really focused on the transitional moments of employment. So from education to work, from job to job, from company to company. And in that, there's, I think the number 65% of the skills needed to be successful at work by 2030 will change. 65% are going to change. And so, you know, one of the solutions that we really hone in on is the metacognitive side of skills, right? So learning to learn. How can we bring that into everything we do so that now as a future employee, when things change, when I have to adapt, I have my own strategies for success on how to do that, right? Because I've got this ability to learn how to learn in new spaces and new functions.
Yeah. I love that metacognition, right? Even as a sixth grade teacher, like that was something that I was focused on with my students, and just realizing how a lot of what we're discussing today around durable skills, like it's not a new conversation, it's just we're doubling down on the importance. And so Kiera, your work with the coding school has been about meeting the moment and preparing students for what's next, not just what's now. When it comes to emerging fields like AI and quantum, what workforce reality made it clear that we can't wait for traditional systems to catch up? And from your vantage point, what's really at stake if we don't act with urgency to prepare students for these future shaping fields?
Yeah, so I mean, I really started to believe in the importance of emerging technologies after spending a year living in China. So when I returned back to the US in 2019, I just thought, we are never going to be able to catch up and maintain our kind of dominance in the US if we don't change our education right here and right now. I saw what they were doing. They are so much more advanced and cohesive in kind of their STEM education. And I was like, we need to be meeting them where they're at and like bringing that here to the US. And so that's really what got me more excited. We were already doing AI and data science, but I thought that was more of a way of empowering students, not necessarily as a kind of like larger need for the workforce. And so when we started our quantum efforts in 2019, and we rolled out, I think it was just like a 1-week high school quantum computing camp. We were a really small nonprofit at this point, didn't have anyone on marketing. So no one should have heard about this besides just, some high school students. And we had multiple big tech companies reach out to us and say, can we fund this program? And anyone knows who runs a nonprofit that just does not happen. And so we're like, okay, we're really on to something here. That there must be a huge need. And then, as we talk to more employers, we realize like how bleak it actually is for a lot of these emerging technologies, because we're not training people early. So they're not aware of these incredible opportunities to shape these industries.
Yeah, I love that. And I think Casey just connected to that, right? This idea of shaping industries. You've built pathways for more than 100,000 students at Pearson through the Tri-Credit and Career Connected programs. But when you follow those students beyond the classroom, right, into the actual job searches, what's the critical gap that you're seeing, and what do students think they're prepared for versus what the reality is of what they're walking into?
Yeah. Well, I think what we're seeing at Pearson, whether it's within our virtual schools that we support or students across the country, is it's the same thing. And it's the disconnect between perception and reality. So the big disconnect between academic achievement and what do you need to have future-ready skills. So I think a lot of students think they go through the hard work and they get their diploma. And they're like, all right, now I'm ready to work. I should get a great wealth-creating career. And I don't know if Carly will touch on it later, but U.S. News and World Report did a great article a month or two ago where the headline was, I believe, bosses firing Gen Z and immediately into the workforce. And if you look at the why, it had little to nothing to do with their academic or technical capabilities, right? It had everything to do with the durable skills, the essential skills. And I think if we take a moment and step back, all of us in the room, when we came up, whether it was from our parents, our grandparents, our church, our communities, etc., we were innately taught these, right? Communication, collaboration, teamwork, leadership, we had those skills. So we went to higher education to get the academic and technical skills. Yeah. And now you see a flip. So all of us are now hiring managers. The generation coming into the workforce now has incredible technical and aptitude abilities, but they're lacking these durable skills. Yeah. And so one of the big things we came out with within our schools is we focused and said, how do we help teach these? They're not being taught in a great way. And we leaned into some of the national organizations that are really leading the way in this. So if you look at FIRST, if you know robotics, they do a great job. Career and technical student organizations like HOSA, Future Health Professionals, Skills USA, they are training problem solving, teamwork, collaboration, leadership, all of those that are core and foundational to the future world of work. As we've talked about, those aren't changing. And so we want to be able to really bring those in to help bring that disconnect so they can have the academic achievements and the real-world technical skills to make them future-ready.
I love that. And just mentioning what Casey just shared, Carly, so you're working with professionals in real time, right? Many of them are in the middle of major transitions, right? Career pivots or moments of uncertainty. When people come to you feeling stuck and not knowing how to move forward, especially in STEM, what's the root issue that they're often missing at first?
Yeah, it's a big question, and I'll turn it sort of to the view of a job seeker, because I think we're all talking about career readiness and preparation, but the truth is that task of going to find the job is first in data. The data shows that will be something that a job seeker, especially Gen Z or millennials, do 4 times more frequently than their parents did. Yeah. So that even task of going to find a job is a skill set of the future, in my opinion, right? That is the thing that you need to learn how to do confidently, and that can't be as passive as I think we sort of all assumed it was, 10, 20, 30 years ago. And I also spend my time in universities as an adjunct. And so I know firsthand that unfortunately universities haven't really even caught up to sort of telling the new narrative, which is, I think Casey actually put it like so perfectly, that they, students come in with such better technical skills, but those durable skills really are sort of the missing piece. And to help them understand, how to connect the dots, how to tell a story, is always been challenging and always been something that I think as humans we've sort of like lagged in our ability to do, and there's great tools now to help you do that, and so that's exciting and an opportunity. But especially telling your own story in such an uncertain landscape, when we think of sort of, three things come to mind for me. We talked about, it's been talked about on stage many times, sort of the economic and political uncertainty just generally for job seekers is making the job market incredibly unpredictable and just challenging to even sort of enter and navigate. To me, the advent of AI has so many positives, but again, for job seekers, that means that there's just a much noisier ecosystem that they're coming into in the application process. Yeah. And AI plus this idea of auto-apply has really turned job seeking into like a game, a volume game, which really like lacks intentionality. So to really get back to the root of your question, I think the first thing that job seekers really need to do is take a step back, try to take the noise out, try to get off of LinkedIn, honestly, get off of sort of like the job boards, and step back and actually do some real self-reflections and like offline. Who am I? What do I know about myself? I know I have these hard skills, I've been taught them, I've been asked to focus on them, but how do I sort of connect the dots? What are the interdisciplinary parts of me how can I communicate the durable power skills, whatever we want to call them? How does that shape the hard skills that I have, and how am I going to continue to evolve in a world in which the pace of change will never be slower than it is today? It's just going to continue to accelerate. So I think step one, sort of taking a step back, trying to reconnect with your communities, reconnect with the people who can help you suss those details out about yourself. I think that's really what I would do if I was stuck. I would get offline and take a step back.
So I love this. And before we jump to just talking about what transformation looks like, everything in my bones is like dying to ask this question, and anyone can answer it. We've talked about power skills, endurance skills, durable skills, skills of the 21st century. We've named it 5 different things over the last 30 years. And every headline about the future of work, every headline about what it means to ready our students for what's next and what's now is speaking about it. What does it look like to actually, help our students build those skills? And again, this is off the cuff, but it's in my bones as an educator and as a parent. Like, what does it look like in your eyes, or what have you seen work?
Go ahead, Carly.
I was going to say, I think it's really challenging because I think in the same way, we have a really good taxonomy to measure hard skills. I say this example all the time to people who I talk about this, like love them or hate them, Elon Musk is right. You can take a coding assessment. It doesn't matter your socioeconomic background, your educational background. If you can take the test and pass, you can get the job. That is not how we're going to be evaluating most jobs in the future, right? That is sort of like a relic of the past when the durable soft skills are such a huge part of it. So I think number one, to me, I don't know how to solve this problem yet, but figuring out how to have a common taxonomy. I know there's organizations that are starting to talk about this and putting out their own frameworks, but having a way to actually assess somebody's durable skills in a way that we all accept, I think, is like step one.
And I would double down on that, right? It's the right measurements and how we do that in an appropriate way. But I also think it's how this sort of notion of durable skills that we all, like Casey mentioned, kind of grew up with and have, how does that become part of the core, right? It is not a fringe thing. And anything you learn, anything you engage with, and anything you do, those skills are prevalent in a classroom, even out of the classroom, in a virtual classroom, right? And so it's how do we as educators, as the folks that are helping these learners get to where they want to go, bring that out and make them aware. Right, like, hey, this was a project we just did. This is collaboration. This is how how do we celebrate those things, but not on the fringe, but throughout the core of all learning. And I think then it rises to the top.
I think it's like high quality experiential learning, both in and out of the classroom. And I think oftentimes out of school time is such a great place for experiential learning. I think sometimes we forget about the importance of introducing experiential learning in the formal classroom. And a lot of our programs, they work during the school day, but they aren't introduced necessarily into the classroom. And I think those are places where, because when it really matters, like grades really matter, assessments really matter. When there's accountability tied to your progress in developing these skills, that's where you're going to really see a delta, I think.
appreciate that. I think the other piece of that is making sure that as we're defining these frameworks and measurement tools, that we are ensuring that there's an inclusive group of people and diverse group of people around the table, because I think history has taught us that sometimes when we create these frameworks, they are not inclusive in the least bit. So just want to name that for the good of the group. So let's shift a bit to what transformation actually looks like. And Ted, let's stick with you for a second. Your work at STEMconnector doesn't just focus on partnerships. It's also about making sure those partnerships are sustainable and built to last. When you talk about meaningful engagement between employers and education providers, what does that actually look like in practice, and how is that different from the kind of one-off, shorter-term recruitment or one-off sponsorship that we've seen in the past?
Yeah, I mean, I always say we want to get employers to come to the table and stay there. And frankly, I used to think it doesn't. I think I've changed a lot in the however many years I've been doing this. That like these partnerships have to be aligned with career, like goals or whatever. I think, outcomes. I think it's, if a company is coming and staying there and doing work, and I'm not going to name names, but if a company's coming there and staying there, even if it's something that's not going to lead to them, I guess what I'm trying to say is, ideally, every dollar that they invest should have some return on that investment. Like that would be, kind of the standard. And so sometimes that return looks like different things to different folks. So sometimes that's a marketing, marketing benefit, making them look better and look like a good corporate citizen. But also those investments can be tied to getting the right people to come in the door, getting people there and helping build the skills that we actually need. So you can have a range of outcomes that you're moving towards. I think it's important to be honest about those outcomes, and I think that drives sustainability. We're working on a project right now. We're providing technical assistance on a Walton grant with our partners at Battelle in Ohio. It's manufacturing pathways pilot, and it's 13 districts across the state of Ohio. And what I'm loving about it is it is the little employers and little manufacturing that's coming to the table and saying, yes, thank you. And they're working with schools. They're bringing students into their manufacturing facilities. The students are, engaged, discovering program providers outside, both out of school time during their secondary pathways, also in post-secondary pathways. And I think it's things like that where we need for employers to feel like they're actually getting something out of this.
I appreciate that. So Casey, you've helped pioneer tri-credit pathways in career-connected learning skills. So I imagine we have hundreds of folks in the room that there might be one or two, maybe just one, a person that doesn't necessarily understand what that means, not just in terms of what the program is, but what that actually means for the student, right? How is that experience different from traditional education models that they say lead to jobs?
Yeah. So show of hands, how many people in the crowd have heard of tri-credit before?
Well, a little more than...
There might be a couple more.
There might be a couple more than one or two.
So, great question. I think before we jump into what it is, I think it may be helpful to understand how we got here and why we got here.
Okay.
And so, one of the big things that we looked at, so our career program within Connections Academy started a little over 2 years ago. And we started with the end game in mind. So what is the future that we want to make sure our students are prepared for? And we worked it backwards. One of the things we did was we did a national survey out there, brick and mortar students across the country, and then we did it with our Connections Academy students. So in total, we had about 12 to 14,000 students actually completed. And we asked a series of questions, but there was one question we were keenly interested in, which was, what is the biggest barrier standing in the way of you and your career? And it was very clear. It did not matter if it were brick and mortar, if it were virtual, whichever it was. There were 4 things that came to the top.
Okay.
First thing was direction, right? Not sure what they want to do, what career field, probably not that different than a lot of us have experienced. 2 was confidence. A lot of them didn't think they had skills and abilities that were there. So a lot of them didn't think these durable skills we talk about were important. 3 was connections. So network, relationships, partnerships. A lot of us got to where we got today because we knew people and they connected us. So you can have all the education in the world, but sometimes it comes down to who you know. So how do you provide a network? And the last was cost of education. It was extremely important. So when we took back and we tried to think about this, we said, what can we help? What can we do to help with get them on the right path, giving them the skills that they need to increase the confidence in pursuing that future, provide connections along the way, and most importantly also help them do it in the most cost-effective way possible. Yeah. And so that's when we circled around this concept of track credit, which is, you asked how it's different. Mm-hmm. So a lot of times when people think about it, they think of dual enrollment, concurrent enrollment, things like that. This is a little different. So we started with the industry, and we took the industry certification and credential that students take, aligned it to a pathway, they complete the credit and get an industry certification. We also aligned it to high school standards to give them, for that same certification, credit at high school in core and elective enrollment. And then last but not least, we made articulation agreements with university partners out there to help with credit for prior learning. So they got kind of 3 for 1. And kind of a way that we demonstrated that was through a partnership. So we have, for example, an IT career pathway. Students can get Salesforce, Google certs, IBM certifications, etc. They then get high school credit for those. And last but not least, we provided some of those partnerships with Southern New Hampshire University, University of Maryland Global Campus, North Texas, to give them credit. So all in all, we wrap back to that core direction, confidence, connection, and in the most cost-effective way, right?
I love it. That's really helpful. And now we have at least 300 people in the room who fundamentally understand what this program is and how impactful it can be. And so, Kiera, I want to bring it back to you. You've built a model and that I would say is not just bold, it's scalable. And so you're making it possible for high schools to offer advanced courses, again, in AI and in quantum, even when they don't have teachers trained in those fields. Can you walk us through how that actually works? Like, how do you build those school partnerships, ensure quality, and ensure that those students are engaged at scale, right? 10,000 in a single cohort with an 85% retention rate, like that's unheard of here. Like, what conditions actually make that possible?
We actually had the Office of Science and Technology at the White House reach out to us about those numbers during the pandemic, because they're like 85% retention rate, 10,000 students over 26 weeks, how?
Yes.
Like, get an external evaluator, so we did. And we're able to prove it was accurate. You know, we started in 2016 doing online computer science education, doing one-on-one and small group instruction, which is, again, how we built our AI and cybersecurity curriculums, believing that like we needed to meet students where they were at and what they were interested in, and had a lot of different varieties of curriculum for them to choose from. So when the pandemic came around in 2020, we were really well positioned to be able to scale and grow, but we took everything that we had learned from providing what I believe is the most supportive, personalized computer science instruction possible, and just made that work again at scale. So I wish I could say that there was any like one piece or one formula or like, oh, we used this tool and it just did everything, but like we treated it just like we would have 5 students in the class as we had 10,000. So like if a student didn't show up, yes, they would, for a lecture or a lab, they would get an automated like text and email, and their parents would too from us. But if they didn't respond, like they would get a phone call, and if like they didn't respond to that, like their teacher would get a phone call. And I definitely drove my staff crazy with this, but I was like, every single student needs to know that they matter. And just, it goes back to the confidence. They need that little push and often just a little support to keep going. And so even though we were training, you know, and the course you're referring to is in 2020, we launched an Intro to Quantum Computing course. It was our pilot course. It was meant just to be for 1,500 high school students, 2 semesters long, and IBM was supporting it. And we ended up getting so much interest from members of the workforce and university students, we expanded it to 10,000 students. The majority is still high school, but opened it up and was a global program. We just kept on trying to meet students where they were at in our lectures, which were 2 hours long every Sunday. We would have TAs answering questions in real time to students' questions, and then the TAs would wrap up and take the top 5 questions and answer them. The instructor would answer them live at the end. So I feel like we try to add in a lot of little innovations that every student, it might not matter to every student, but at least 1 or 2 of those are going to matter to keep a student going. And so if we have 1,000 of those little innovations that we're working on and always trying to be better, that's what we found really was able to keep students engaged and supported. I think one other thing that's particularly important for success in these areas is we made our course pass-fail, which I think is really important when you're learning really difficult subjects. And really frees a lot of students from imposter syndrome and the fear of failure, and instead embracing more creativity, realizing there's not always one answer or one way of doing things. And then second was the live instruction. Having, instead of an asynchronous course where they couldn't get help, yes, they're still sitting behind a computer screen, yes, there's 10,000 students, but they would know if they didn't show up, they would be getting a call from us, or sometimes a TA would send an email to a student being like, great question today, and really making it feel like it was a group of 30 or 20 students still.
I love it. So Andrew, I want to bring it back to you because we have talked about this idea of we have to prepare our students and learners, right? No matter if they are pre-K to already in enterprise systems, and on their second career. We have to prepare them for jobs that don't exist yet. But how do you design for both, right? How do you balance preparing students for what they need and learners for what they need now and jobs that aren't in existence in this moment?
So first, hire Kiera and her team to come in and do all of the work for you. It's amazing. And I love the notion, before we go to the question, love the notion of the pass-fail idea, right? When you think about work, very rarely do I get a B on a strategy deck I turn in to somebody. I get a thumbs up or a thumbs down most of the time, right? Or feedback on that as well. But so when we think about what we build and develop to help learners achieve their goals and get where they want, it's really sort of having to model what we're asking them to do, right? By being adaptable, by being agile, by building things that we can change on the fly and move. We talk a lot about continuous improvement, right? And in our product teams and how we view things, what are those cycles that we look at to be able to make the changes to our curriculum, to our certifications, to whatever it may be that we're putting out to the world to meet the changing dynamic of the need. And it's co-development, right? So when you bring employers to the table, not only are you allowing them to have a voice in what they need out of their employees, you're getting the right standards, you're getting the right alignment, you're getting the front line of how their organizations are changing, how the roles within their organizations are changing, the needs they have in these future employees. And with that comes the application of it, right? So we're able to have employers provide real-world applications, internships, mentorships, as Casey would say, pre-ships, right? There's all different kinds of ways that we can bring employers' voices into the curriculum. And holistically, Tiffany, we kind of break things down into 3 views. So we talk about learn when we sit down with employers, right? So when we say learn, that's courseware, that's curriculum, it's content, whatever it is. Then we'll talk about verify with employers, right? So how are we verifying what they've taken away from their engagement with courseware, with content, with learning experiences. And then we talk about certify, right? So ultimately, when we have employers at the table, our energy is focused on how do we get to industry-recognized credentials that translate and allow that learner to tell their story, something that Carly said, right? I love that notion, right? So it's learning, it's measurements, the right measurements, and then it's certifying that this is my story, this is who I am, and this is why I'm ready for the workforce.
Yeah. So as we close out, I want you to get ready. I hope you, at least 2 people, maybe not 300, have a question or a reflection that you'd like to share with a broader group, or a question that you'd like to ask one of our panelists. But before we jump there, I'd love for you all to just take one moment and just think about the one word that you would use to describe this moment in time and how it's giving you confidence. So you can break the rules a little bit if you need a sentence, but one word or a short sentence that describes how you're feeling about our ability to meet this moment in time. The change, the shift in economies, the emerging technologies, and our responsibility as industry leaders, educators, citizens, to ready our workforce, right, for what's to come. So I'll give you a moment, and then I'm going to start with Casey, because I'm just staring at you, so I'm going to just roll with it.
Knew that's how that was going to work.
That's how it's going to work, yes.
One word, opportunity.
Opportunity, all right?
I would like to cheat in option 2, but I think we have a legacy of resilience here, especially in the United States.
All right, opportunity, legacy of resilience.
I was going to say human, but what I really mean by human is like interdisciplinary. So really leaning into, at the end of the day, AI is going to help us just be more human.
We're going to be more human. I love it. Yeah.
I don't have one word, but seeing all of our students not just learn about these technologies, but the things that they want to do to change the world for the better with them.
Yes, I love that here.
It's really hard. I'm verbose. Like one word is
Listen.
I would say a couple words, but it's this. I think we're in this really unique inflection, a moment in time where the notion of readiness is changing, right? And we've talked about college and career pathways for a long time, and most of that time has been focused on developing a college pathway.
Yeah.
I think for the first time, career is a part of that. And it's not an and, it is college and career together lead to readiness and employment, right? And so even on the college side, career has to be oriented into what we're doing on those pathways.
I love it.
So that was way more than one word.
Listen.